Have you ever wondered why two people starting from the same place, with similar talents and opportunities, can end up living completely different lives? One remains stuck in the ordinary cycle of bills, obligations, and routines, while the other seems to rise above, commanding wealth, influence, and freedom. It is almost as if they are playing a different game, by rules that most of us were never taught. Imagine walking through a crowded street in your city. You see people rushing to work, clutching their coffees, worrying about deadlines. But if you look closely, you might notice something else. There are always a few who move differently. Their eyes scan the environment not with anxiety, but with calculation. They seem to know something the rest do not. What if I told you that difference has less to do with luck or intelligence than with an invisible code, an inner script that guides decisions? Machiavelli, centuries ago, hinted at this when he wrote, not about money directly, but about power, influence, and human behavior. He observed that the masses are guided by appearances and habits, while the few who rise above learn to see the hidden levers behind society. And this is precisely where the mental code of the wealthy begins, in perceiving life not as a rigid system, but as a set of dynamics to be mastered. This video is not about cheap tricks or cliches about waking up earlier or thinking positively. It is about the deeper psychology that distinguishes those who merely survive from those who design their own fate. If you stay with me, you'll see how philosophy, psychology, and ruthless honesty about human nature reveal patterns you can apply immediately. But before we dive in, I want you to ask yourself honestly, are you playing life by your own rules, or by rules that were handed to you by others? Parents, teachers, society? Because the secret code is not about breaking the law. It is about breaking the invisible scripts that keep most people in place. And one more thing. If you've ever felt that nagging sense that life could be more, that maybe you are meant to move differently than the crowd, then this conversation is for you. Stay with me until the end, and share in the comments if you've ever sensed that you were meant to play a different game. And of course, don't forget to like this video and subscribe, because what comes next might just shift the way you see your entire life. What if the way you see money, power, and opportunity has been quietly shaped by invisible hands? What if the reason some people accumulate wealth and others remain stuck has little to do with intelligence and almost everything to do with perception? Imagine, just for a moment, that your current life is not the full picture. It is only the script you were handed. And what if rewriting that script is not only possible, but necessary? Think about how often you have felt trapped by circumstance. The job that drains your energy, the obligations that consume your time, the endless waiting for a better moment that never arrives. Now imagine yourself stepping outside of that frame. Imagine being able to look at life not from the ground, where every obstacle feels massive, but from above, where patterns and opportunities become visible. That shift in perspective is the beginning of the mental code that separates the wealthy from the ordinary. Machiavelli would say that most people are like passengers on a ship, following orders, waiting for the winds of chance to decide their course. But the few who master the art of power take the helm. They may not control the winds, but they learn how to adjust the sails. And here lies the great what if. What if you stopped waiting for conditions to improve and instead learned how to command yourself, your decisions, your strategies? This is not about imagining a fantasy of riches falling into your lap. It is about the radical possibility of designing your own trajectory with clarity and discipline. What if, instead of reacting to every demand around you, you began to anticipate moves like a chess player? What if you understood that every choice, no matter how small, is either reinforcing your old script or writing a new one? Close your eyes for a second and picture yourself 5 years from now. If nothing changes, where are you? Still playing by the same rules, hoping for different results. Now picture the other scenario. You begin to shift the way you think, see, and act. You stop waiting. You start maneuvering. Which vision feels truer to who you really are? The seed of transformation is planted the moment you dare to imagine a different reality. And that what if is not just a daydream. It is the spark that the great minds, the strategists, and the wealthy have always nurtured. The question is, will you? Here's the hard truth. Most people are not poor because of external forces alone. They are trapped because of the way they have been trained to think. Society teaches us to value comfort over risk, predictability over strategy, and appearances over substance. This is the illusion of normal life, the belief that following the common path will somehow lead to extraordinary results. But as you've likely noticed, it never does. Think about the advice most of us receive growing up. Study hard, get a stable job, save a little, and hope for retirement. This path may offer security, but it rarely produces true freedom or wealth. Why? Because it trains the mind to avoid uncertainty, when in fact uncertainty is the very space where opportunity lives. The wealthy understand this. They are not reckless gamblers, but they are willing to embrace calculated risk, while the majority clings to safety. Machiavelli pointed out something profoundly unsettling. People are more easily controlled by their fears than by their desires. The common person allows fear of failure, rejection, or instability to dictate their choices. But those who rise learn to reverse this equation. They let ambition guide them, and they treat fear not as a stop sign, but as information, a signal pointing to where growth lies. Here's the disruptive insight. The greatest danger is not failing. It is living within the illusion of safety. Normality tells you to follow the crowd, to wait for permission, to be realistic. But realism, when defined by the masses, is often nothing more than disguised resignation. The wealthy break this illusion by refusing to accept the limits that society quietly imposes. They see through the facade and realize that what most people call security is actually dependence. Pause for a moment and consider how much of your life is lived according to genuine choice, and how much is simply compliance with a script written by others. The rupture begins when you confront that question honestly. Here is the paradox. What feels safe now often leads to struggle later, while what feels risky now often leads to freedom later. Breaking normal is not about rebellion for its own sake. It is about reclaiming authorship of your own life. And until that illusion shatters, wealth, both financial and personal, remains out of reach. The secret code begins here. Ordinary people seek safety. Extraordinary people seek leverage. Which one are you seeking? When we talk about power, wealth, and freedom, it is easy to dismiss these ideas as modern obsessions. But history proves otherwise. Niccolo Machiavelli, writing in the early 16th century, did not address money in the way we think of it today. Yet his work, The Prince, remains one of the clearest manuals on influence and strategy ever written. He observed that human beings are predictable, driven by fear, ambition, and the need for approval. And those who understood this code could shape not only their own destiny, but the fate of nations. Centuries later, psychology confirms much of what Machiavelli intuited. Nobel Prize-winning psychologist Daniel Kahneman demonstrated that most people make decisions not rationally but emotionally, relying on mental shortcuts that often sabotage their long-term interests. In simpler terms, we act out of impulse, habit, and fear. The wealthy, however, train themselves to recognize these traps. They slow down, they analyze, and they use reason as a compass rather than emotion as a leash. Think of Warren Buffett, often regarded as one of the most successful investors alive. He has said repeatedly that the secret to wealth is not brilliance but temperament. While the crowd panics, he stays calm. While others chase trends, he waits patiently for opportunity. This is not luck. It is discipline rooted in an understanding of human psychology that echoes Machiavelli's insights. Control yourself, and you will never be ruled by the chaos of others. The authority of history and psychology converge on one central truth. Success is not primarily about external resources, but about mastering internal states. Machiavelli knew that fortune favors the bold, but only when boldness is guided by calculation. Kahneman showed us that most of us fail not because the world is against us, but because our minds betray us with biases we never question. When you hear this, it might sting a little. It forces you to ask, am I the one steering my decisions, or am I being steered by fear, habit, and the illusions of safety? Machiavelli would say that if you are not governing yourself, someone else surely is. The weight of authority, philosophical, historical, and psychological, falls on this single point. The code of the wealthy is not mystical. It is practical, rigorous, and rooted in human nature itself. The question is not whether it works. The question is whether you will dare to apply it. Most people believe their struggles are unique, but in reality, they are following invisible patterns that quietly govern their lives. These patterns are so ingrained that they feel like common sense when in fact they are chains. For example, the belief that hard work alone guarantees success. If that were true, construction workers, nurses, and teachers would be the wealthiest people in society. But they are not. Why? Because the code that separates wealth from survival is not about how much effort you put in, but about where that effort is directed. Machiavelli noticed that crowds are often blind to these patterns. They believe appearances, stories, and promises, while leaders observe deeper forces, power dynamics, hidden incentives, the true nature of people's desires. Similarly, in today's world, the wealthy see structures that others overlook: taxation systems, market cycles, social networks, and leverage points. They don't necessarily work harder. They work at a different level of awareness. Here is another invisible pattern. Most people trade time for money, a straight exchange that caps their freedom. The wealthy, on the other hand, create systems, investments, businesses, intellectual property that work even when they do not. The average person sees money as the reward for effort. The wealthy see money as a tool to generate more money. This single shift in perspective reshapes an entire life trajectory. Psychology gives us another clue. Human beings are wired to seek comfort and to repeat familiar behaviors, even when those behaviors produce mediocrity. We stay in jobs we hate because they feel safe. We avoid bold moves because they feel uncertain. This pattern of avoidance becomes a prison disguised as stability. The wealthy recognize this trap and deliberately train themselves to tolerate discomfort, to lean into uncertainty, and to view fear as a signal of growth rather than danger. Pause for a moment and reflect. Where are these invisible patterns playing out in your own life? Are you repeating a cycle that keeps you in place? Are you confusing activity with progress? The revelation here is unsettling but liberating. If your life feels ordinary, it may not be because of lack of talent, but because you are unconsciously following patterns designed to keep you ordinary. Once you see them, you cannot unsee them. And that awareness itself is the beginning of rewriting your code. Sometimes a single sentence can cut deeper than an entire book. That's because truth, when spoken plainly, pierces through layers of excuses. The mental code of the wealthy is filled with such sharp truths, statements that may sound harsh at first but liberating once understood. Here are a few. Hard work without strategy is just exhaustion. Security is often the mask of dependence. Fear is not a wall. It is a compass pointing to growth. Ordinary people wait for permission. Extraordinary people create opportunity. Your habits today are the architecture of your freedom tomorrow, or your prison. These are not motivational slogans. They are cuts against illusions. Each one is designed to expose a hidden flaw in the way most of us think. And once exposed, you can no longer hide behind the comfort of ignorance. Machiavelli himself was a master of such brutal clarity. He declared that it is safer to be feared than loved if you cannot be both. Not because cruelty is a virtue, but because he saw how human loyalty is fickle. This insight, stripped of sentimentality, forced leaders to ground their power in structures, not emotions. Likewise, wealth demands that we anchor our lives in reality, not in wishful thinking. In psychology, this technique is sometimes called pattern interruption. A strong, direct statement shakes the mind awake, forcing it to reconsider assumptions it has long taken for granted. That's why the wealthy often speak in simple but piercing truths. They are not decorating reality. They are cutting it open. Think of the statements above again. Which one unsettles you the most? Which one makes you want to argue back? That is often the very area where your current script is holding you captive. Here is the beauty of these sharp truths. They do not require belief. They demand testing. If you treat fear as a compass rather than a wall, does your life expand or contract? If you stop working harder and start working strategically, does opportunity increase or decrease? The wealthy are not attached to illusions. They are loyal only to what works. And that is why their truths, though uncomfortable, hold power. Because power does not lie in what sounds good, it lies in what actually shifts reality. Here's a paradox that unsettles many people. The wealthy appear to control more of life, yet they often accept that they control less. What does that mean? Ordinary people exhaust themselves trying to control circumstances, the economy, their boss, other people's opinions, things forever beyond their reach. In contrast, the wealthy focus their energy on mastering the only territory that truly belongs to them: their mind, their choices, and their strategy. Machiavelli wrote that fortune controls half of human affairs, but the other half is governed by our actions. Most people surrender even their half, blaming destiny, politics, or luck. But those who rise understand the paradox. By accepting that some forces are uncontrollable, they reclaim power over what can be shaped. This is why they seem unshaken during crises. They do not waste energy fighting storms, they adapt their sails. Think about it in modern terms. An average employee might fear layoffs in a recession, paralyzed by events beyond their control. A strategist, however, anticipates such cycles and positions themselves with multiple streams of income or adaptable skills. The difference is not the storm, it is the preparation. The paradox is that surrendering to what cannot be changed frees energy to dominate what can. Here lies another duality. The wealthy appear ruthless, but in truth they are often disciplined in ways most people avoid. Ordinary life prioritizes comfort. Extraordinary life prioritizes leverage. To achieve that leverage, you must confront the uncomfortable paradoxes: that freedom requires discipline, that security requires risk, and that power often requires humility before reality. Psychology echoes this through the concept of locus of control. People with an external locus believe life happens to them. People with an internal locus believe life happens through them. The wealthy almost always operate with an internal locus. They accept setbacks as feedback, not fate. And that mindset transforms every defeat into training rather than trauma. Pause here. Which side of this paradox do you usually live on? Do you waste energy wrestling with what you cannot command, or do you channel it into what you can? The code of the wealthy is not about controlling everything, it is about controlling the right things. And in that paradox lies a freedom most people will never taste. What happens when you begin to see life through this different lens? When you no longer chase safety blindly, when you refuse to be ruled by fear, when you start directing your energy toward leverage instead of mere labor? The answer is both simple and profound. You reclaim your power. This is the unspoken reward of the mental code. Wealth in its deepest sense is not just about money, it is about agency. It is about no longer being at the mercy of circumstances, bosses, or systems that treat you as replaceable. It is about designing a life with margins, choices, and freedom. Money, when guided by this mindset, becomes more than currency. It becomes time, autonomy, and influence. Imagine waking up in the morning and realizing that your day is not dictated entirely by others' demands. Imagine being able to say no without fear of collapse. Imagine that your future is not an accident waiting to happen, but a construction you are deliberately shaping. This is not a fantasy reserved for a lucky few. It is the natural consequence of living by the principles we have been uncovering. Machiavelli would argue that true fortune favors those who dare to act boldly. Psychology shows us that boldness, when disciplined, creates compounding benefits: greater confidence, expanded opportunities, stronger networks. The wealthy live in this cycle. Each risk taken strategically reinforces their sense of agency, which in turn opens new doors. The average person lives in the opposite cycle. Each fear avoided shrinks their agency until they become spectators of their own lives. Here is the emotional promise. If you shift your mindset, if you practice this code, life begins to feel different. You stop living as though everything is scarce and fragile. You begin to act from a place of strength, not desperation. And the world responds to that strength in ways that surprise you. Ask yourself, what would it mean to live with that kind of agency? What would it mean to know that, step by step, you are moving from survival to strategy, from fear to mastery? The promise of this path is not just wealth in the bank. It is wealth in the soul, the kind of grounded confidence that no recession, no critic, and no failure can fully take away. And that, more than anything, is the true reward of this hidden code. To give structure to all we've discussed, let's uncover the conceptual backbone that holds this code together. At its core, it is not random advice. It is a framework rooted in philosophy, psychology, and timeless human behavior. Machiavelli provided the philosophical foundation. His writings reveal that power is not an accident of birth, but a consequence of perception, strategy, and courage. He showed us that human nature is predictable, that fear and desire are levers, and that fortune favors those who prepare themselves to act decisively when opportunity appears. Psychology adds the scientific layer. Behavioral economics, as demonstrated by Daniel Kahneman and Amos Tversky, proves that most people act irrationally, sabotaging themselves with biases, loss aversion, overconfidence, short-term thinking. The wealthy, consciously or not, train themselves to counter these biases. They reframe losses as investments, they seek external feedback to counter overconfidence, and they extend their time horizon when everyone else is stuck in the present. Then comes the strategic application, the domain of leverage. Here lies the practical formula. Shift perception. Stop reacting emotionally. Start observing patterns. Control the controllable. Master your choices, your habits, your network. Embrace discomfort. Use fear as a signal for growth, not retreat. Build systems. Stop trading time directly for money. Create assets that outlive your labor. Expand agency. Let each bold step reinforce your sense of authorship over your own life. This framework explains why the wealthy seem to operate on a different plane. They are not merely lucky or gifted. They are fluent in the hidden grammar of human behavior. While most people resist uncertainty, they learn to navigate it. While most see money as an end, they treat it as a tool. While most fear standing apart from the crowd, they know that true opportunity is rarely found inside the herd. Think of it as a map. The crowd walks blindly, following each other, colliding into the same walls. The wealthy unfold the map and see the terrain. The rules of the game were never secret. They were simply ignored by those too distracted to notice. Now, you have the framework in your hands. The only question left is whether you will continue walking blindly, or whether you will use the map to design your own path. So now we return to the beginning. Why do some people rise while others remain trapped in the ordinary cycle? It is not luck, nor is it mere talent. It is the code, the hidden script that rewires perception, dissolves illusions, and demands responsibility for one's own life. Machiavelli understood it centuries ago. Most people prefer comfort to power, illusion to truth, and that is why most remain powerless. But you do not have to. The journey we've taken together has revealed the mental architecture of the wealthy, seeing fear as a compass, seeking leverage instead of labor, controlling the controllable, embracing paradoxes, and building systems that outlast effort. These are not mystical secrets. They are choices available to anyone willing to confront uncomfortable truths. The real awakening is this. Wealth is not first created in the bank account but in the mind. If your inner code changes, your outer reality will inevitably follow. But here lies the catch. Most people will never apply it. They will nod, agree, and return to the comfort of their old script. The rare few who dare to test these ideas to live them will experience the shift Machiavelli hinted at, from being ruled by circumstance to ruling their own destiny. Pause for one last reflection. Which path will you choose? Will you continue waiting for fortune? Or will you step into the role of strategist, author, and architect of your own life? If any part of this message struck you, I invite you to do something simple but powerful. Comment below with one illusion you are ready to break, one script you are ready to rewrite. Because speaking it, even in this small way, is the first act of reclaiming your agency. And if this conversation lit a fire in you, if it made you see the world differently even for a moment, then like this video and subscribe to the channel. Here, we are building not just an audience, but a community of thinkers and doers, people who dare to see through illusions and live by a higher code. The ordinary will always exist, but you are not ordinary. You now hold the map, the framework, the secret code. The question is no longer, what if? The question is, will you act?